All right, U.S. history class, I'm going to make this quick. Theodore Roosevelt becomes president when McKinley is assassinated at the beginning of 1901. Roosevelt had been vice president, did not have a clear conception initially of what his presidency should look like. He tried to just follow and continue the policies of McKinley, but he started to develop his own path and really had a vision of what the presidency should look like. In a lot of ways, he created the modern presidency by talking directly to the people. The phrase that he used was the bully pulpit. He said that the president should be a steward of the people, bound actively and affirmatively to do all he could for the people. So Roosevelt worked very hard and saw his vision as the presidency as a tool to help the people of America succeed. He also uses the strength of the presidency to get things done quickly. He doesn't wait for Congress, and probably the best example of that is the reading you're going to do on the Panama Canal. A couple main issues to focus on in this video. The first one has to do with trusts. Roosevelt's stance on trusts is that he was concerned about them and concerned they were harmful for the general welfare of people. He made a distinction between good trusts and bad trusts, and bad trusts were the ones that were limiting competition. You see on this chart on the left, you have this massive spike in trusts being formed in 1898, 1899. So just before he takes office, you have going from less than 100 mergers, companies merging together per year, to over 1,200 per year in 1899. So he was concerned that some of these trusts were harmful to the public. And the approach that he takes was best probably identified in 1902, and he begins what ends up being called trust busting, where there was a lawsuit filed against the Northern Securities Company. Roosevelt told the Justice Department that they were supposed to prosecute the Northern Securities Company for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. Now you'll remember the Sherman Antitrust Act had not really been used to regulate companies and restrict trust up to this point. But the Supreme Court in 1904 upheld a decision that ordered the company to be dissolved. So the company is dissolved in 1904, and Roosevelt is seen as a trust buster. He is seen as someone who's able to stand up to these big companies and regulate them. The question about how effective Roosevelt is, I think is pretty interesting because he doesn't actually break up very many other trusts. He only breaks up a couple more. In fact, the person who comes after him, William Howard Taft, who has nowhere near the popularity of Roosevelt, really does more to break up trusts than Roosevelt does. But Roosevelt gets the credit for this. And that is one of the main elements of Roosevelt as a progressive, is his position on trusts. The second one is the work that he does to regulate the food and drug industry. And on the left, you have this copy of the cover of this book called The Jungle, which was published in the beginning of the 19th century, and it leads to a federal investigation of the meatpacking industry. The book is a novel, as I explained in class, and it tells the story really of all of the problems that can go on in the meatpacking industry if you're making hot dogs and you have things that get in to the food that aren't supposed to be there. If you really want to hear what they are, you should go to Wikipedia and read the Jungle entry, or better yet, just read the book. It's really gross, and it makes me very happy that these laws that regulate the meat industry exist. So Roosevelt reads this book. He immediately, within about 6 months, puts together legislation that becomes the Meat Inspection Act. And this is an act that you should know as an example of the progressive era. And this sets rules for sanitary meat packing. It requires the government inspection of meat products. This is the setup to the legislation that becomes the modern FDA. And if you look at modern day instances like mad cow disease and the problems with meatpacking today, those problems were magnified 100 years ago, and the solutions that we have today in terms of regulating companies to make sure that food is safe come out of the progressive era. So this is an element of the progressive era that still resonates today. The other element going on is the work of a person named Samuel Hopkins Adams, and he worked to expose the dangers of medicines. Patent medicines were ones that contained pretty much alcohol or other drugs and were sold with labeling that said they could cure any sort of disease, although they had no evidence that they could actually cure them. So in 1906, the Congress passes the Pure Food and Drug Act. This requires companies put a label on their products that explains the ingredients, and this becomes the basis for our modern approach to labeling foods. And the exact same fight that went on with genetically modified organisms and that labeling in the initiative process in November, again, that process of labeling products and the idea to label products started with this part of the progressive era. Go team.